The funniest part of this story is not that Assassin's Creed Hexe might be changing. The funniest part is that Ubisoft may have finally stumbled into a premise that sounded sharp, eerie, and different, then immediately started acting like it was too strange to survive contact with management. Gene Gisden was given a larger franchise role as head of content for Assassin's Creed. Ubisoft described that position as leading the overall creative direction of the series. Then, in a later official brand update, Gisden said he had also recently taken over as creative director on Hexe. That part is confirmed. Also confirmed, Clint Hocking left Ubisoft earlier this year. Also reported by major outlets, Benoit Richer has now left as well, which means Hexe has lost multiple key leaders in a short stretch. Before anybody starts rubbing sage on their monitor and calling it analysis, that is the first thing the viewer actually needs to know. The project has gone through real leadership upheaval. Now here is the rumor. Earlier reporting around Hexe painted it as a darker, more linear Assassin's Creed game with horror flavor, supernatural elements, and one memorable mechanic where the player could possess a cat and use it to distract enemies. That was leak reporting from much earlier in development, not something Ubisoft officially confirmed in detail. The newer rumor says that, after the leadership shift, many of those magical elements may have been reduced or removed. That is not confirmed by Ubisoft. But the rumor says the stranger edges may be getting shaved off. That is the part people are reacting to, and it is not hard to see why. Because the cat is the entire story in miniature. You do not even need a wall of studio politics to understand it. A witch trial Assassin's Creed game, where you can possess a cat, is the sort of mechanic that tells players somebody had an actual idea. It is weird in the useful way. It is specific. It has personality. It tells you this was not just another giant content silo, where the only design goal was to keep you busy until the next store rotation. The moment people heard that cat detail, they immediately understood that Hexe might actually feel different. It might have an identity. It might have a tone. It might not just be the usual map sludge with a spooky filter laid on top. And that is exactly why the cat became such a perfect symbol for this whole mess. Weird mechanics are not just funny details. They are evidence. They prove that a team at some point was willing to commit to something with teeth. Strange systems force real choices. They affect level design and stealth routes. They affect tone and how the world reacts to the player. You cannot put a cat possession mechanic into a game and still pretend you are making safe page slop for everybody and nobody. Once a mechanic like that exists, the rest of the project has to make room for it. Which is why, if the rumor is true and that kind of thing got cut, fans are not just losing a cat, they are losing proof that Hexe once had enough nerve to be interesting. This is also where the leadership story and the mechanic story actually connect. Because when a new head of content arrives, people naturally assume he is not there to admire the weirdest thing in the room. They assume he is there to decide what fits the larger franchise shape and what needs to be brought into line. That does not make Gene Gisden a cartoon villain. Leadership roles exist for a reason. Games need direction. Projects need rescue work sometimes. But you can see why the audience jumps to the cynical version. They hear head of content, then hear rumors about magical elements getting stripped out, and their brain immediately fills in the missing sentence, the cat did not stand a chance. Fair or unfair, that is how publisher stories get translated by players now. The corporate title enters the room, and the strange mechanic starts writing its will. That feeling gets stronger when you look at the timing. Clint Hocking gone. Gisden taking larger control. Benoit Richer gone. Then rumor chatter that the project may be getting pulled towards something more grounded and less openly supernatural. Even if you do not know every name, the sequence alone is enough to make fans uneasy. One departure can be shrugged off. Two key departures on the same project in a short period, followed by talk of features being cut, starts to sound less like routine development and more like an internal argument with winners and losers. That is the part polished PR language never fixes. Players are not stupid. They know when a project starts giving off that somebody upstairs changed the assignment smell, and Hexe sounded worth defending precisely because it did not sound like business as usual. Earlier reporting described a darker, more narrative-driven entry, more linear than the enormous role-playing installments, with a stronger horror atmosphere and supernatural flavor. In plain language, it sounded like Assassin's Creed might stop trying to be every kind of game at once. That was the appeal, not size, not number of icons, not another broad buffet built to keep everyone mildly occupied and nobody fully awake. Hexe sounded like it might have a point of view. Smaller in the smart way, narrower in the useful way. It sounded like something that could actually leave a mark, instead of just eating your weekends and then evaporating from your memory. That is why this rumor lands. Not because every leak deserves faith. Not because every anonymous source is sacred. It lands because it feels painfully believable. Ubisoft has spent years training people to expect this exact kind of thing. The company keeps talking about bold directions, fresh ideas, new phases, and all the other polished phrases that mean nothing until the game shows up. If you like this breakdown, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and it's completely free. Then, somehow, every second story around the publisher sounds like a promising concept entering a room full of committees and leaving with less blood in it. Ubisoft has trained us to expect the worst, and now we are just reading the manual. That is the real joke here. The rumor works because people do not hear it and think, wow, that sounds impossible. They hear it and think, yes, of course that sounds like them. Some fans try to turn this into a lore fight, but that is not even the sharpest version of the argument. The question is not whether magic belongs in Assassin's Creed. This series has already played with ancient relics, visions, simulations, mythical imagery, godlike nonsense, and enough pseudo-mystical material to keep theory channels employed for a decade. So the irony here is almost too good. If the rumor is true, then a franchise that has been flirting with the supernatural forever may be getting nervous about weirdness. In the one entry where witchcraft panic, fear folklore, and surreal mechanics actually fit the setting like a glove. That is not discipline. That is not purity. That is a company hearing the one pitch that finally matches its own weird baggage and still deciding to pull back, because confidence is apparently an endangered species in the building. And that is why the real story is not magic. The real story is nerve. Does Ubisoft still have any? Because this whole thing reads less like a creative update and more like a management story wearing a game's skin. Everyone online stares at the cat because the cat is visual and funny. But the bigger headline is that the people steering this project keep changing, while the project is still being sold as some unique branch of the franchise. That is the kind of thing viewers latch onto instantly. Not because they all care about staffing charts, but because they understand the emotional shape. Interesting idea. Leadership reshuffle. Rumor of weird features getting cut. Fans split between relief and disappointment. That is a real story. It has movement. It has stakes. It has a villain, and the villain is not one developer. The villain is franchise management as a force of nature. Forum reaction tells the same story. In leak communities and Assassin's Creed discussion spaces, some people are saying a more grounded Hexe could be a good thing. Others are saying that if the magical material goes away, then the only part of the pitch that felt fresh goes with it. Both reactions make sense. But the split itself proves the point. Hexe sounded different enough to create an argument. Safe games do not create arguments. Safe games create nodding, prodders, and memory loss. Nobody has heated discussions about products that already feel focus tested into a smooth gray pebble. The fact that players are already fighting over what Hexe should be means the original pitch had actual bite. Which is probably why the idea of that bite being filed down makes people so immediately hostile. So no, the smart version of this story is not confirmed disaster. That is lazy and it destroys trust. The smarter version is very Ubisoft behavior. Tell the viewer what is firm. Tell the viewer what is rumor. Then explain why the rumor feels so believable. Firm, Ubisoft changed the franchise leadership structure and expanded Gene Gisdon's authority. Firm, Gisdon later said he had become creative director on Hexe. Firm, Clint Hocking left. Benoit Richer left. Rumor, magical features may have been reduced or removed, including the cat possession concept from earlier reporting. Once you frame it like that, the rant hits harder because you are not hiding the ball. The audience can follow the chain. They know where the facts end and the cynicism begins, which means the cynicism actually lands, instead of sounding like a cheap performance. And the chain really is that simple. Hexe sounded interesting because it seemed darker, stranger, more focused, and less like the usual franchise treadmill. Then leadership shifted. Then key figures left. Then rumors surfaced that the strange parts were getting cut back. Maybe the rumor is exaggerated. Maybe the final game still has plenty of that weird atmosphere. Maybe Hexe comes out and proves all of this anxiety was misplaced. That is possible. But until Ubisoft shows real footage and actually explains what the game is, players are going to fill the silence with the only tools available to them, suspicion, memory, and the deep conviction that giant publishers always seem one meeting away from making everything less interesting. That is the breakdown. Not Hexe is ruined as proven fact. Not the cat is dead as official history. The breakdown is that a project with confirmed leadership turmoil is now surrounded by a rumor that matches the public's worst assumptions about Ubisoft. That is why people care. That is why the topic travels. Ubisoft may have found a premise with real identity, then started backing away the second that identity looked too hard to standardize. And that is the kind of thing players recognize instantly, because they have watched this company do the same dance before. It keeps reaching for boldness, then acting shocked, when boldness is harder to manage than oatmeal. So here is the question I would actually leave people with, because this is where the audience engagement should hit, instead of fading out like a tired podcast. If you could keep one weird element in an Assassin's Creed game, what matters more to you? The horror atmosphere or the cat mechanic? Which one feels like the thing that makes Hexe worth talking about in the first place? Or do you think Ubisoft has already taken that decision out of your hands, and filed your interest away under brand consistency, while somebody in a meeting nods like they just saved creativity from itself? Fact spine used for the rewrite. Ubisoft officially announced Jane Gisdon's expanded Assassin's Creed role on February 23, 2026, then said on March 4, 2026, that he had also recently become creative director on Hexe. Recent reporting says Hexe also lost Clint Hocking and Benoit Richer in quick succession. Earlier reporting described Hexe as darker, more linear, and more supernatural, including a cat possession mechanic, while the magical elements were cut back. Angle remains rumor, rather than confirmed Ubisoft disclosure.